From the start, privacy was a key concern for many assessing the high-tech neighborhood Sidewalk Labs and Waterfront Toronto proposed for a large chunk of the city's underused portlands. A year on from the formal announcement and after some high-profile resignations, it remains thorny. Here for a look at where things stand today, Anne Cavoukian, distinguished expert in residence, leading the Privacy by Design Centre of Excellence at Ryerson University. Mark Wilson, former chair of the board of Waterfront Toronto and still a part of its digital strategy advisory panel. David Fraser, privacy lawyer and partner at McInnes Cooper and an advisor to Sidewalk Labs. Bianca Wiley, senior fellow at CG, that's the Centre for International Governance Innovation, and co-founder of Tech Reset Canada, and Sadia Musafir, founder of Tech Girls Canada, and we are delighted to welcome some of you back and some of you here for the first time, and we'll let the audience at home guess who's who. Let's start, Mark, with you. Give us just the latest. Where's this at right now?
Well, we are in the middle of a planning process to receive a proposal from Sidewalk Labs for the Quayside area on the waterfront. And then based on that proposal, we will determine whether we want to accept it and move forward with that or not.
Do you have a sense of when that proposal will be coming?
I think we'll be getting drafts probably early next year. The schedule has already moved once. I wouldn't be surprised if it moves again. It's a very complex project, taking a lot of big ideas and making them operational in a particular place in Toronto is a lot more complicated than I think either Sidewalk or Waterfront had anticipated.
And this is sort of unprecedented, right? What's trying to be attempted here?
That's exactly what the objective was when Waterfront Toronto put out its RFP to find an innovation and funding partner. And that was Sidewalk's mission and objective to, in fact, try and transform cities around the world using Toronto as the first place where they would create that district, that neighborhood, with a whole set of innovations, some of which are digital, many of which are not.
I want to get some feedback now from the former Information and Privacy Commissioner from the province of Ontario, who, when last you were here discussing this very topic, you were kind of bullish about it. And then I just couldn't but help notice that you've resigned from your involvement in all this. What happened?
And I didn't do it lightly. I wanted to draw attention to the fact that we had to make sure that all the personal data that was being collected automatically by the sensors and other technologies were de-identified at source, anonymized at source.
De-identified meaning?
Meaning no personal identifiers. You wouldn't know it's Anne Cavoukian walking or you or this is my car or anything. And the reason that was critical is unlike most uses of what I call operational data, where the individual, the data subject, can exercise some control over the use, the operation of that data. They can consent to it, they can revoke consent, they can choose not to consent. They have some sense of control. With the data here, you have no control. It's all being collected automatically with the emerging technology, sensors, all picking up data.
But what changed? Because initially, obviously, you thought that problem could be solved. What changed?
It can still be solved. I had a commitment from Sidewalk Labs, and they were very good. They wanted to use my Privacy by Design framework to proactively embed the needed protections into the design of all of their operations. And they've been very good so far, except at the last meeting that I attended on Thursday, they created this new group called the Civic Data Trust, which sounds great, to address the governance issues associated with this. There's privacy issues and governance issues. They're both very important. I address privacy. And they said the Civic Data Trust will consist of Waterfront Toronto, ourselves, other bodies, companies, and others, and we will encourage them to de-identify the data at source, but we have no control over what they do.
So encouragement wasn't enough.
Oh my God. This must happen as the default.
Okay. David, your response to what you've just heard?
Well, I'm actually optimistic that that's where we're going to end up. The Civic Data Trust model is one where all the information that's collected in the area, which could include personal information, but it could also be information about pollen counts and sunshine hours and things like that, goes through a process in which the community, and not Sidewalk Labs, the community actually determines, analyzes, goes through almost an ethical review, what's called a responsible data impact assessment, in order to make decisions about whether or not this information can be collected in the first place. So that framework was proposed. The rules for that framework were not proposed. And so on one hand, if Sidewalk had control over it, then Sidewalk could dictate those terms. But what they've put forward is, here's a proposal. it will now be out of our hands. It's going to be into the community's hands and into the stakeholders' hands, and they get to establish those rules. And I'm optimistic, and certainly privacy by design has been thought about throughout this whole process, and that's not ending as of last Thursday. That's going to continue. And so, but it will be that body that makes those decisions, that sets the same rules for anybody who operates in the Quayside, collecting information, again, about non-personal information or information that relates to humans in that space.
I just wanted to add to that, if I might, Steve, because first of all, I don't think Sidewalk actually proposed that it and Waterfront Toronto be on the data trust. It left that question open, and it's a very important question as to who's actually going to be on this trust, assuming we go forward with it. Who's it going to be accountable to? And what's the accountability measures it's going to take. But who's actually going to be on that was not part of their proposal. The other thing that's, I think, very important is that Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk already have signed an agreement, the Plan Development Agreement, which specifically includes privacy by design, which specifically includes looking at de-identification techniques, edge computing, to in fact accomplish exactly what Anne's looking for. So I think there's no question that there's a common goal here to do the de-identification. The actual nuance is more technical. In order to accomplish that cost effectively, instead of using a big computer to de-identify, we actually need a chip that runs the artificial intelligence software that can do the de-identification at source, at the camera, throw away the image, transmit anonymous data.
We do have this technology?
No, it's been
we have to develop it.
The thing is,
I mean, so that's really the issue, and that's why people are reluctant to sort of guarantee that this will happen, because the technology's been announced. It's not commercially available.
But it's a work in progress.
the devil's always in the detail. And that's why I want Waterfront to Toronto to say, in terms that cannot be debated, lay down the law, everything must be de-identified at source. And that my frustration, in part, is A, they haven't said that, and B, I have referred Sidewalk Labs to one of the best, Professor Khaled Elimam. He is the strongest world-renowned expert on
Who's he with?
He's at Professor University of Ottawa.
Okay.
Dr. Elimam is known for the strength of his de-identification protocols combined with the risk of re-identification framework, where he minimizes the risk of re-identification to less than 0.05%. That's less than the likelihood of being hit by lightning if you go outside. Yeah. So that's what we have to use.
We should point out, hang on, let me jump in because we haven't heard from a couple other people yet. Your departure was not the only one that was noticed. Sadia, you have stepped down as well from the Digital Strategy Advisory Panel, is that right?
I did.
And how come?
I was not getting the sense that Waterfront Toronto, with its mandate of responsibilities to be a steward for the residents of Toronto, was taking the public trust issues as seriously as they should have been. And there was no public record of the concerns that were being raised by myself and my fellow panelists. So the optics of something like that is that whatever's happening, and a lot happened in the 5 months that I was on the panel, was that it had our blessing, and that was not the case.
There are always two approaches to take when something like this happens, right? When it comes to crunch time, either you resign, and that makes a very powerful statement, or you stick around and see if by staying you can change things to your satisfaction. You obviously chose the former rather than the latter. Why not stick around?
I tried the first one.
You did? You mean you tried sticking around?
I did, and I think when I joined the panel, when the panel was brought together, some of the issues were really well known in terms of what we were trying to help Waterfront Toronto understand, and our advice was supposed to help make the decisions around whether this was a good proposal for the City of Toronto and the residents of Toronto. So 5 months of trying to do that and not having visibility into the concerns that were being raised is a very big deal to me. So I didn't want to leave, but sometimes you don't have a choice.
Bianca, I should get let me get an update on where you're at on this, because the last time you were here, you were clearly the most skeptical person around all of the issues on privacy. Anything changed in your views over that period of time?
No, and it wasn't just privacy, it's the entire structure of this project, and data and private infrastructure and all kinds of different topics. So where I was a year ago was wondering how we were supposed to have any kind of a democratic process when residents and people in this country's understanding around data literacy, issues of intellectual property, the economics of data, what a data monopoly looks like, what power asymmetries are, is very low, myself included to a degree. This is how complicated these issues are. A year later, This company came to town with $50 million US. 12 million of them were allocated to doing public engagement. There has been no public education on these really important topics, which is super problematic, just as a start. And second, the engagement itself in terms of consulting people on issues even beyond things related to technology and data and anything else have been theatrical. These have not been grounded in any sort of proper democratic process. And it's really important to remember some of the issues that we're talking about are born of the fact that this request for proposal was put out by Waterfront Toronto. Waterfront Toronto is not the government. So we have a public corporation that has an economic development mandate, taking what responsibility it had and pushing it over to a vendor to define how these things should be working. If that isn't a structure for disaster, I don't know what is.
Okay, I know everybody else wants in on this, but let me read, I think in the interest of fairness here. The CEO of Sidewalk Labs is Dan Doctoroff, who's a former deputy mayor of New York City, and he had this to say to its advisory council October 17th. The central idea is that our role is to be an essential catalyst, showing how to solve real urban problems, not just here in Toronto, but around the world. This is really what Waterfront Toronto had in mind at the get-go, that a catalyzing force was necessary to break a pattern of increasingly unaffordable, unsustainable, less livable, less connected communities. I mean, that's clearly where his focus is. Yeah. Are you concerned, what is your concern about the nature of that focus?
Does that sound like a corporate interest problem, or does that sound like something a government should be managing? Because when you read that, to me, I'm thinking those are all governmental responsibilities, not things that a for-profit corporation would be here to dictate the terms of. That's my initial reaction to that.
Mark Wilson, you want to come back on that?
Sure. I mean, the notion that someone's dictating the terms is simply incorrect. They have the right to prepare a proposal, and we have the right to examine that, to critique it. They have the right to revise it. And at the end of the day, we have a right to reject it, and they have a right to walk away as well because they don't like the deal. So those are, that's the process we're currently engaged in.
Okay, Bianca, come back on that.
It's really important that we start to speak more honestly about this proposal and maybe we'll reject it, maybe we'll accept it. We have had for more than a year government staff from the bureaucracy working from all levels of government to get this plan into some kind of shape.
So you think it's a done deal?
They're working toward making it happen, which, what is the likelihood that this amount of government energy and time and political capital is going to go this far down the road and then staff at the city are going to turn around and say, our recommendation is to reject this proposal? Is that really a plausible outcome here?
Well, first of all, this notion that there's work going on behind doors and there's some secret plan that hasn't been revealed is simply incorrect. I think that the process, as I said earlier, has taken incredibly longer than anyone had anticipated. So originally, if you look at the framework agreement that was signed, they thought they would have what's called a plan development agreement, which was the next phase, would be done in 60 days. That took 7 months. More than 7 months, because the complexity of this thing, the number of innovations and ideas that they're trying to bring to bear on this, I think boggles the mind. And they have to go through a selection process to bring that forward. So I think, they revised the schedule once. I think they may revise the schedule again. And I think it's entirely plausible that those plans will be rejected. I think what I hope will happen is that we'll go through an iterative process where plans will be presented, people will critique them, as they did last week at the Digital Strategy Advisory Panel for the Data Trust. People critiqued a number of aspects of that. I think those plans will evolve. We'll see if a data trust is the right solution. And then the plans will iterate and change, and then we will come to a decision.
Let me get David's take on this. David, go ahead.
Yeah, certainly on the topic, and I can only speak to my own experience and what I've seen through this project. When I don't think anybody would have anticipated, certainly the critics when this project was initially launched, would have thought that we would ended up in a situation where Sidewalk says, we don't want to control the data. They've been open and receptive. This is the result of significant consultation. You don't have you can't imagine that they would have come in here and hired Anne, who's so incredibly outspoken and so incredibly thoughtful about these sorts of things, expecting that they could just whitewash things. Like, this has been the result of significant actual listening, taking things into account, recognizing that, yeah, there are multiple stakeholders. This is not going to be a sidewalk property. Ultimately, the decisions related to all this stuff has to be made by the community and rooted in the community.
Well, the risk is when you get to you in a second, Sadi. The risk is when you ask an Anne Kavukian to sort of sign on to a project, and then she does, and then she leaves. It does tend to get people's attention, right? Oh,
there's no doubt, and I can't speak for Anne, but I'm hopeful she'll remain engaged, because the decision making that's key to the actual when the rubber hits the road is in the next steps.
Sadi.
It's incredibly frustrating for me as somebody who calls Toronto home and works in technology for us to keep pretending that Alphabet and Google didn't understand what they were doing, especially when it comes to data, when they came to Toronto. So this whole thing about we are listening and responding, this is not their first rodeo. And it's not the first smart city that has been built in the world. So for us to keep talking to the fact that it is incredibly complex, but I think there are certain things that have to be table stakes, and that's part of the reason why I was frustrated, because we should know some of these things. There are assumptions coming into this model, even the proposal, what we want, that the public should know. And we should have had the discussion before a vendor was even selected. We should have had wide public consultations to figure out what we want to build. We picked who we want to build the thing first, and then we're like, oh, what are the requirements? What are we actually looking to build? Which is backwards.
So it's backwards in your view. Anne.
What I want to make clear is what attracted me to work on this is we wanted to differentiate the smart city built here in Toronto from all the other smart cities the rest of the world, Dubai, other places. I'm on the International Council for Smart Cities. And they are smart cities of surveillance. They track everything. You have no privacy. It is a surveillance exercise. What I was hoping would distinguish Toronto, we would be a smart city of privacy. We would address privacy right up front, which is why they contacted me, embed privacy by design, make sure that people's privacy is totally preserved, and then allow the data to be used in whatever ways, and data governance issues will have to be addressed. But I wanted to lock down the privacy issue. And the only way you can do that is by de-identifying all information at source. And I had a commitment about that from Sidewalk Labs at the beginning. So now I'm looking to Waterfront Toronto to put that commitment in writing so that they lay down the law. Anyone who works with them must do this up front so that we can have a smart city of privacy, not of surveillance.
Can the organization that you used to chair give her that undertaking?
I think they've already committed to privacy by design in the plan development agreement. So I think that commitment's been made. I think they've already committed in writing in that agreement to maximizing the de-identification and use of edge technologies, as I already said. It's written down in a contract. It's been signed.
It's walking the talk, Mark. That's the critical.
Yeah, no,
devil's in the detail.
So that has been done, and I think it's pretty clear that that's a shared goal. So I think that's an opportunity that we'll absolutely move forward with. And I personally, as a member of the Digital Strategy Panel, will continue to advocate for that. So I have no question about that.
Bianca.
But I just want to talk back to Sadia, one of the comments she made, which was around, and I appreciate the point of view around, should we have had all the requirements set in a big public consultation before we issued an RFP? So that's one approach to, in fact, procurement. And I would view that as a very traditional approach to procurement. What Waterfront Toronto tried to do here, and in fact was pushed by the community many times to do, was to step up its game in innovation. And so it said, look, I want to search the world to find the best innovation partner, and then having found that person, we'll figure out what innovations will actually apply, and therefore what rules will need to govern those innovations. To do that in advance of actually knowing what the innovations might be, I don't think would have been the right process.
Mark,
Okay.
I don't want to conflate democratically informed processes with traditional. So we can't just leave behind things that we have put in place because they are thorough, because they provide a check and balance for power asymmetries. That's why those processes exist. Just because they've existed for a while does not mean that we chuck them, because that's not what innovation is. Both you and I work in technology industry. We know this shiny orbs thing that we do is like, very first time, we're going to revolutionize the world. But some of the things that work for a reason. And I think that's why public trust has been so shaky from the get-go for this project, because there was no investment on both Waterfront and Sidewalk's part. And Sidewalk is a profit-generating company. So they're doing what they're supposed to do. I'm looking to Waterfront as a steward for the residents of Toronto. There should have been public education, and we should have had more meaningful conversations around what it is that the residents wanted to build. Do we even want the things that are being proposed? We don't know because nobody asked the public.
Okay, let me get Bianca in here, and then I'm going to come forward with another issue.
2 points here. One of them, to build off of the anti-democratic nature of this process, is that whoever said anybody wanted all this data collected? That's an important step in this discussion. I didn't, but some parties here decided we'd accelerate into what we need to do to anonymize it or de-identify it, which is one track, absolutely part of the conversation. We have a whole other host of issues that we didn't talk about, and that, frankly, as a global, it's a global conversation going on right now about to what degree do we want our behaviors captured, to what, even if they're in aggregate, to what extent do we want those used and monetized in products? How do we want to make good use of these things within the public service versus turning them into any sort of a commercial product?
Let me do a quick follow-up on that. Would you acknowledge that many millennials nowadays are less fussed about some of those issues than perhaps people of older generations?
Absolutely not.
No?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No. And they're savvy because they're realizing how people are incorrectly framing these issues. The second part for me is building on this idea around, Sidewalk's a for-profit business. Waterfront is the one we look to. To a degree, yes, looking to Waterfront. Again, Waterfront is not the government. We need to be very clear about that. But there's also, after a year in business, the way someone does business with me matters. So I understand that they're here doing business, but how they are doing business is something that I think as a city and as residents, we need to be paying attention to. Because when you have had a year to genuinely take time to do education and engage people and tell them what you're doing. And Mark, to be honest, they have not been forthright in what is going on. People still don't know what the plan for this space is. They could be coming out and co-designing and really working with the community. They had a year to do that. They've burned it. So even if they are here doing their business as a business would do, we are still a city, and as the residents of this city, how this all works matters immensely to us as our home, and how they're doing this business with Waterfront. We should really still be thinking about how that process is working.
Okay. Would you feel more comfortable about this whole thing if City Hall were the actual backstop here instead of this quasi-public organization, Waterfront Toronto?
Yes, but let's be real about how the city, the province, and the federal government haven't been showing up in public. They're working on these things. They're not coming out and explaining to people what the existing privacy laws are. I was at the last Waterfront Toronto Digital Strategy Advisory Panel meeting, and I heard Waterfront Toronto proudly exclaim at all levels of government that this project will not be breaking the law. And I thought, good. I'm glad that's where we're at today, a year in. Like, what is going on here? Where is everybody around the table? Okay. This is just, it's like a free-for-all right now.
Let me find out from David Fraser, do you, or perhaps, what can you point to which would suggest that there is an appetite in the capital city of Ontario for people to live in a community that does involve, you use the word you like, surveillance, information gathering. Pick the least offensive thing.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't characterize it as surveillance.
What would you call it?
I think we're going to be talking about information related to the operation. Currently, in any municipality, in any organization of people, there's information that's generated. That's just axiomatic. And then when you want to have, for example, understanding about the timing of streetlights, for example, traffic controls, that is usually based on counting cars and the velocity of cars and all that. This is just inherent. But I think what's the important thing to focus on is, at least the key part of this discussion, if the City of Toronto were doing this, they would be subject to the Municipal Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. They would have no requirement necessarily, a legal one, to do a privacy impact assessment or do a review of these things. Smart cities are being built all over the place without people even being aware of all the data that's being generated, much of it personally identifiable, much of which is just kind of put together in databases. This is an opportunity to closely scrutinize a project, and I'm proud that I think this will become a model that will be adopted in the rest of Canada, but it's also exportable around the world. But all to Bianca's point about asking, should we be collecting this information at all? That's an important question. That's probably the first question that the Independent Data Trust is going to be examining on every application. It's going to be a responsible data impact assessment. Is this justifiable? Is this proportionate? Is this relevant? Does this help the community? Does this further any of these objectives? And so they'll be in a position to say no. And that's a key part of that screening process. I've been part of similar processes related to research ethics reviews for the use of personal health information. And you go through a process and you scrutinize and you reject projects, or you accept projects, or you put conditions on projects. And I think it's a really good model where the first question is, should this be collected at all?
Anne.
The Civic Data Trust has to make many decisions relating to the uses of data gathered, absolutely, but not on the point of personally identifiable data. That's what has to be the default. You do not collect any personally identifiable data, full stop. Then there are many, many decisions to make, of course, governance-related issues, but we have to assure the public, the residents of the waterfront, that your privacy is going to be protected. And if we want to use this as a model for other jurisdictions in North America and others, as a smart city of privacy, you have to start with that initial point. That's the reason I resigned. I wanted to attract attention to this issue. And fortunately, it's been working. So I'm hoping that we will get the assurance we need, I think from Waterfront Toronto, that you cannot collect any personally identifiable data. After that, by all means, there are many questions.
Quick comeback here.
Yeah, just one additional point. At least the state of the law in Canada is if it's not personal information, you can collect it. You can do whatever you want. There's no regulation about it whatsoever. At least this framework actually puts controls and scrutiny around all kinds of information that's collected.
Oh, no, but with due respect, I'm sorry, and I spoke to the Privacy Commission about this. On the issue of privacy, we have to rule that out at the beginning in terms of the accessing identifiable data. That has to be, the default has to be privacy. You cannot collect that because people cannot exert any control or consent or lack of consent associated with the data.
Let's go over here.
And
Mark
first,
and then Bianca.
so Anne, I don't think there's any debate on that. I think the only question that we're actually this far apart on is whether you can do it at source or not and in a cost-effective way, given the state of the current technology. So I think there's broad agreement at Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk to that, and certainly I would advocate that to the Digital Strategy Advisory Panel.
But Mark, if you don't do it at source, it's going to be a treasure trove. You will end up having personal information.
Everyone wants to do it at source, Anne.
Great.
Everyone has stated they want to do it at source.
Let's put it in writing.
But can the technology support that today? I think the answer is no economically. As a technician, I will tell you the economics are not there. So can you do it at an extreme cost? Absolutely. Can you do it economically and cost effectively at scale? No.
This sounds like an impasse.
Then you're giving it away. Then you're going to be giving it away.
No. But I want to jump in on something else, Steve, which is you reduced this project to digital surveillance. And I think that's a very, very bad thing to have done, because this project is about far more than that. It's about mobility, it's about inclusiveness, it's about affordability, it's about potentially creating a new timber industry for Ontario. It's about a whole range of topics, and to just characterize it as a purely digital project, the digital's in support of many other things. So I was at the design review panel yesterday, and Sidewalk began to present their building typologies that they want to start to use. It's not yet a proposal, it's again a set of ideas. A lot of excitement from the leading architects and planners in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, that this project has the potential to be transformative and very exciting and a great place to live. Did they want more details? Yes. Were they skeptical about some of the proposals? Yes. But were they enthusiastic about the potential? Yes.
Also yes. Bianca.
Yeah, so I think the fact that we've been talking this much about privacy is another indicator that we are off the rails here in terms of the scope of what we should be talking about. So privacy, yes, is a thing. However, from the business community's perspective, even within Canada, there are so many other issues here around how that data should be used potentially in commercial circumstances, and that's going to be part of the data governance discussion. Also the fact that Sidewalk went, and this is what I'm talking about, framing things, said that, well, we should open a whole bunch of data. And that means that all this data should be available to everybody with an open license, for everybody to share in the spoils of urban innovation. And what I want to be super clear about for everybody who has heard that term, that open data would be something that's great for everybody here, is to be very, very clear that there's a massive power asymmetry between companies like Alphabet and other users of data, and that it is completely disingenuous to make it seem like we're just going to all be sharesies now, when what it means when you have so much data already to add a bit more to your stockpile and do something with it is a totally different game than what it means for someone who's just getting access to this data. And so, I mean, there's a complexity to the economics here that if we're trying to be looking at this to be doing good business development around technology, urban innovation, data, and governance of data, and intellectual property, all of this, we should be talking about all of those things to the same degree that we've been talking about privacy.
Okay, down to a couple of minutes left here. Time flies when you're having fun. And you mentioned the business community.
Yeah.
And you're with CG, so you've heard of Jim Balsillie.
Yes.
Here's him. Here's the guy who co-founder of RIM. From the start, this project should have been debated publicly and involved experts in IP and data. Instead, Waterfront Toronto continues to, his word, weaponize ambiguity while making irreversible decisions that will have a major negative effects on all Canadians. Is this how we want our cities and the future of our country managed? You want to take the first kick at that?
There are no irrevocable decisions been made. And I think Jim Balsillie did himself no credit in that op-ed. And in the way he was angry and at terms, frankly, insulting. So I think he, in fact, has reduced the credibility of his words and position in this. There are certainly things I would agree with Jim Balsillie on, which is that we have not done the proper job, in fact, of letting our Canadian companies grow to scale and taking advantage of the IP that's created here. I think that's an issue that's very important. It's a very important economic development issue. And one of the transformations that Sidewalk has, in fact, proposed, this is a big change in how they're approaching digital, is instead of creating a single digital layer that everyone has to use, they're saying we've abandoned that idea. We're going to create an open, standards-based framework, much like the internet, that anyone can come in and play in. And I think that's going to create more economic development opportunity for all of us, which I think is very important.
Okay, Sadi, you get the last word.
I think it's really important to start talking about a year plus into this. What's in it for the City of Toronto and its residents? Let's talk about the economics of what's at play. We have some of the most lucrative land in North America, perhaps even the world, that is being considered for this. We keep hearing that the advantages and the jobs and the economic development will only pan out if it's at scale, which means we're looking at more than Quayside. So the world is watching us. We have to be careful in taking into account lessons that have been learned elsewhere in the world and make sure that what we do here actually corresponds to the responsibility of what we have. And let's talk about all the complicated factors that we have. Let's talk about data. We can't not talk about data. It can't be something that comes afterwards. Privacy is one thing. Also the value of the economics of that data. Shouldn't the residents of Toronto get to decide if they want to actually benefit directly from it? And our digital infrastructure should be owned by our public institutions. Why do we have an American-owned company coming here and doing this?
I think we have started to ask and potentially answer some of those questions, and some of them we will have to leave for next time because we're plumb out of time. But I want to thank the five of you for coming into TVO tonight and having such a great, civilized, and vigorous discussion about this very important topic. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.